A museum in Xi'an contains an exhibit that appears to defy logic. 8,000 soldiers standing in pits, all made of clay and facing east. None of them are the same. Each has a different face, rank, and expression. Whoever created them was not trying to build an army. They were attempting to create people. And they succeeded so convincingly that archaeologists describe walking into that pit as if you were entering a room full of people who had simply remained motionless for an extremely long time. This is where our story ends. But to understand why a man would build a ghost empire, we must go back to the beginning. Around 260 B.C.E., China was not yet a unified country. Instead, there was the Warring States period, in which 7 major kingdoms were locked in a 200-year stalemate, fighting each other with the exhausted savagery of people who had lived in war for so long that it had become the default condition of life. Zhao, Chu, Wei, Han, Yan, Qi, and Qin. Qin was located in the west, in the Wei River Valley, geographically isolated, culturally backward, and severely underestimated by the more polished eastern kingdoms. That assumption would eventually prove to be a fatal mistake for all states that held it. The Qin advantage was not solely military. It was a philosophy called legalism, a harshly effective and morally radical way of thinking. Legalism was more than just a legal framework. It was a complete redefinition of the state's purpose. The Confucian tradition, which shaped the other 6 kingdoms, taught that society was built on virtue, that a good ruler governed by moral example, that harmony arose from well-cultivated relationships, and that the wise led by bringing out the best in others. Legalism responded, "That is idealistic talk. This is how you really keep people under control." Everyone in the state was responsible for everyone else. If you failed to report your neighbor's crimes, you could face the same punishment. Only military success and agricultural output were rewarded. Birth, status, and cultural accomplishments were not considered. Merchants were regarded with suspicion. Scholars were considered threats. The only things that mattered were agriculture and warfare, because those were the only activities that sustained and expanded the state. It was brutally efficient, producing the most powerful military machine in Chinese history. Ying Zheng became king of Qin at the age of 13. By the age of 38, he had defeated all 6 of the remaining warring states, after 11 years of carefully planned military campaigns. He did more than just win battles. He brought kingdoms to their end. He banished the nobility of the conquered states. He standardized weights and measurements, writing, axle widths, and currency. For the first time in history, he provided China with a unified system. He also devised a new title for himself. No existing term was appropriate. He took the words divine ruler and emperor and named himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin. The first emperor, not just of this dynasty, but the first of what he hoped to be. More than 1,000 years later, the Ming dynasty built the majority of the Great Wall that we see today. Nonetheless, Qin Shi Huang built his own walls, linking and expanding existing fortifications along the northern border to form a long defensive barrier against the steppe's nomadic peoples. He relied on forced labor. Estimates of the number of deaths caused by his numerous construction projects range into the hundreds of thousands. The wall, the tomb, the roads, and the canals were all built using conscripted labor. He had unified China. He wielded absolute authority. He had transformed the world, and he was afraid. This is the reality of absolute power. Once you have it, the most dangerous thing you can face is an idea, not a military force. In 213 B.C.E., the Qin Empire was the most powerful state in Chinese history. Its armies had defeated every opponent. Its competitors had been eliminated. Every blade that could have threatened the emperor was either locked away in his personal arsenal or melted down. Nonetheless, a group of Confucian scholars at a banquet dared to argue that the emperor's reforms were overly harsh. They claimed that the old system had been effective. They cited ancient kings, described in surviving texts, as examples of successful rulers who did not practice legalism. These men were not insurgents. They were academics, engaged in scholarly debate. The emperor's chief minister, Li Si, recognized the threat immediately. He warned the emperor that ideas are more dangerous than armies because they cannot be seen forming on the horizon. By the time you notice them, they've already spread. The decree was issued in 213 BCE. Any books that did not deal with Qin, history, farming, medicine, divination, or practical skills had to be turned over to local authorities and destroyed. This included histories from other kingdoms, works of philosophy and poetry, as well as centuries of accumulated knowledge about Chinese intellectual life. Any private individual found with a banned book after 30 days would be marked and sentenced to forced labor. Scholars who gathered to debate old texts or who taught and spread forbidden ideas were to be executed. Scholars who compared the current dynasty to previous ones and spoke negatively about the present were to be executed publicly, along with their families. The past was being outlawed. In the following year, 212 BCE, the emperor discovered that the alchemists he had assigned to find the elixir of immortality had been deceiving him, wasting his resources, delivering nothing, and speaking ill of him behind his back. He launched an investigation. The investigation expanded to include scholars as well. Several hundred people were arrested, some escaped, and those who were apprehended, approximately 460, according to historical accounts, were executed by being buried alive. His own son, Prince Fusu, wrote to him in protest, expressing concern about the killing of the scholars and warning that it could destabilize the empire. In response, the emperor sent his son to the northern frontier as a military overseer, effectively exiling him. The heir he saw as his most capable was removed from the line of succession because he had the moral courage to speak out against it. This was the long-term outcome that no legalist doctrine had predicted. Scholars served as the empire's institutional memory. They were the ones who understood the administrative precedents, agricultural expertise, diplomatic customs, and engineering methods that had been developed over centuries. They were more than just guardians of philosophy. They established the human foundation of governance. When intellectuals are exiled or killed, not only is criticism silenced, the deeper loss is the eradication of the knowledge base that allows complex societies to operate. The Qin Empire lasted only 15 years after the death of its founder. It fell not because of a foreign invasion, but because of peasant uprisings after being forced into labor and abandoned in the fields when the bureaucratic system designed to support them collapsed. That collapse occurred because the people who knew how to run the system, scholars, administrators, and keepers of institutional knowledge, were destroyed alongside the books. Qin Shi Huang was afraid of losing his life. That, in itself, was not remarkable. What distinguished him was the intensity of his fear, like a man dreading the arrival of a creditor to collect a debt, with a sense of urgency, intimacy, and the painful realization that the meeting was unavoidable and could not be postponed. He had succeeded in uniting China. He held complete military and administrative authority over the world's largest empire. He had directed the construction of walls spanning thousands of miles and a tomb which his engineers worked on throughout his reign. He had every material comfort a person could want. Nonetheless, none of it addressed the real issue. Around 215 BCE, he began his search for the elixir of life. He dispatched alchemists and scholars to look for it. He sent ships eastward to legendary islands where immortals were said to live. He had heard that certain mountains contained the herb of immortality. He started expeditions. None of them returned with what he was looking for. Some never returned. The alchemists who stayed at court faced a unique professional challenge. The emperor expected tangible results. At the time, the most advanced pharmaceutical thinking proposed a substance that appeared extremely promising: mercury. For centuries, cinnabar, also known as mercury sulfide, was used in Chinese medicine and religion. Its vibrant red color symbolized blood and vitality. When heated, it produced liquid metallic mercury, which was silvery, dense, and visually striking. Mercury was associated with the transition from one state of existence to another in ancient medical thought. It appeared to be exactly the type of material that could connect mortality and immortality. The emperor began taking it, both in pill and liquid form. He may also have inhaled fumes from heated cinnabar, which his alchemists had prepared in sealed chambers. Mercury poisoning is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of toxic exposure in medical history. It causes progressive neurological damage, including tremors, poor coordination, mental decline, paranoia, erratic behavior, and, eventually, organ failure. The symptoms of mercury poisoning are similar to the behavioral changes described in historical accounts of Qin Shi Huang's final years. He became increasingly paranoid, trusted no one, and moved from palace to palace, never staying longer than 2 nights in the same room for fear of being assassinated. He began issuing increasingly irrational commands and eventually withdrew from public life. In the end, the medicine was causing the very effects it was designed to prevent. The cure was killing him. Qin Shi Huang died in his carriage during an inspection tour of his realm in 210 B.C.E., somewhere in Shandong province. He was 50 years old. The senior court figures present, Zhao Gao, the chief eunuch, and Li Si, the chief minister, responded in a way that reveals much about the legalist order's political climate. They kept the emperor's death a secret. For several weeks, the imperial procession continued, with the deceased ruler sealed inside his carriage, and the court conducted business as if he were still alive. Meals were delivered to the carriage as if he were simply secluding himself, and fresh fish were loaded onto the surrounding carts to mask the stench of decomposition. Why was it kept secret? Because the legalist system the emperor created was built entirely around the unchecked power of one individual. It had no rules for succession and no formal structure for handing over authority. The emperor's word was the law, and once he could no longer declare it, the system had no way to keep working. Zhao Gao used the weeks of secrecy to fabricate the emperor's last commands. He then sent a letter, supposedly written in the emperor's name, to Prince Fusu on the northern border, instructing him to take his own life. Fusu, the emperor's most capable son, the one who had objected to the killing of the scholars, and the one who might have brought stability to the empire, complied. He died by suicide. The second son, Hu Hai, was put on the throne instead. Hu Hai was weak and easy to control, exactly the kind of ruler Zhao Gao wanted. The first emperor had designed a system so completely centralized that his death could be concealed, his best heir eliminated, and his least capable son installed, all without the system itself recognizing or stopping what was happening. He had created a flawless machine. And a flawless machine can be operated by whoever is willing to take the controls. The Qin dynasty lasted 15 years after its establishment and only 13 years after the death of its founder. For an empire built to last 10,000 generations, and for a system designed to be self-sustaining, flawless, and absolute, 15 years is more than just a collapse. It is a judgment. Rebellion erupted from all directions at once. Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's peasant revolt in 209 B.C.E. was the starting point, but the blaze had been spreading since the first conscript died on a construction site too far from the capital for the supply network to reach. The emperor's legalist order was extremely effective at gathering resources and enforcing obedience. However, it was completely incapable of producing the type of public legitimacy required to keep a state intact during crises. In difficult times, a government requires people who believe in it. Legalism produces people who submit to the state, which are very different things. The Qin dynasty ended in 206 B.C.E., less than 4 years after its founder died. The rebels plundered the capital, set fire to the palaces, and destroyed the great library assembled for the practical needs of the state texts that had survived the book burning because they were useful to the government. The irony is almost unbearable. He burned books to defend the state, and then the state collapsed, destroying the books he had preserved. From this upheaval, a general named Liu Bang rose to power and founded the Han dynasty, which ruled China for 4 centuries. Liu Bang quickly reversed the harshest legalist measures. He recognized that the scholars he allowed to return were not enemies of the state. Rather, they represented its memory. The Terracotta army was sealed inside its pits in 210 BCE after the emperor died, and remained unknown until 1974, when a farmer drilling a well near Xi'an discovered something other than water. The excavation has continued ever since. So far, approximately 2,000 of the estimated 8,000 warriors have been discovered, and the excavation is still ongoing. For over 2,000 years, the warriors have stood in their pits. They were created to protect the emperor in the afterlife, serving the same purpose as the legalist state did during his lifetime: complete order, formation, and protection. Nonetheless, they shielded him from nothing, because what he feared was not an army. He dreaded time. Time was not something that could be ranked. Qin Shi Huang's legacy extended beyond the Qin dynasty, which lasted only 15 years. He built China. The standardized script he introduced became the direct ancestor of the Chinese writing system, which is still used by more than 1 billion people today. The concept of a unified Chinese state, ruled by a central government over vast territory, became so ingrained in the Chinese political imagination that every subsequent dynasty defined itself based on whether it succeeded or failed to maintain this unity. He attempted to dominate history, and it consumed him. However, the civilization he created out of the turmoil of the warring states outlasted any single dynasty. It outlasted the dynasty he was loyal to. It outlasted him. It still exists today. Qin Shi Huang built a wall to keep the world out, but he was powerless to build one against time. He left 8,000 stone warriors behind to guard a legacy that had already crumbled by the time the first revolt erupted. He had the books burned, so no one could compare him to the past and find him lacking. But the past lived on longer than he did, preserved in hidden walls, buried jars, and the memories of those who had committed to memory what they had been forbidden to read. His fear of death compelled him to drink mercury. His fear of criticism drove him to murder his scholars. His fear of losing control drove him to create a flawless system that anyone could operate. Each choice he made out of fear only made the dreaded outcome more likely. The lesson is uncomplicated, but it's hard. The things we create to protect ourselves from loss are frequently the same things that cause it. The walls we build to keep out what scares us end up keeping us in. And the 8,000 soldiers standing in the dark under Mount Li, in perfect formation, weapons ready, facing nothing, are still waiting for an enemy that will never appear from outside.